Hi, so I thought I'd make this video, which is to explain my experiences and how I've learnt to upgrade the handles of some coarse fishing rods that I've been using. So this all started with these kind of rods. This is actually a wand rod, so a light tip rod, 100% cork handle with the sliding reel fittings. This is a slightly more modern one. You can see it's a plastic. But some of my older rods were actually the metal style, and of course nowadays there's a lot of convenience, and understandably so I think, around using the modern, sometimes called the Fuji style. So what originally happened for me was one of my favourite float rods. I decided I wanted to get it upgraded because I was fed up with sometimes fishing and reel just dropping away and being a real problem for me. I found somebody to do it, and I've got to be honest and say they did a wonderful job, but it took them a hell of a long time to do, and cost me around about £100, including the shipping, to get the rod to the guy and then to get it back again. When I got it back, I sort of looked at it, thought about it. Yeah, wonderful job. I was pretty sure that I could do a similar kind of job myself. So I bought some of the pieces from a couple of different vendors and decided to attack another one of my float rods, and I was reasonably pleased with the results. I learned a few things on the way, but enough for me to decide that it was going to be a good idea to try and do some of my other rods as well. So this is an example of a pretty much the same rod as I've just shown you, where I've actually upgraded. So you can see I've got a winding reel fitting which is on here. I also added a hook keeper. This is not completely finished. You can see here this has actually been recovered the rings, whereas here the whipping still needs to have that epoxy coating put onto it. So if we sort of talk about the approach, so this is the butt section of the rod that I'm going to do, and I'm going to talk you through the process of how I'm going to do it. So what I actually want to do is I want to put a reel fitting somewhere up around here, and this is an example of a reel fitting. I'll show you different options and ideas in a minute. So I've really got two ways that I can approach this, right? I can either take the entire handle off, put the reel fitting on somewhere wherever I want it, and then put a brand new handle all the way down. It's possible. But actually what that means is I've got to get the corks, and then I've got to sand all the corks down, get them all nice, and not really for me, I don't think. The other way of doing it, which is I know was the way that the pro did my original float fishing rod, is actually to go from the rings down. So what that actually means is I've got to take this ring off, and then figure out where, take an amount of the cork off, with the idea of then the replacement handle gets put back in there. Then I'm going to put the hook keeper on there, and then reattach this same eye. And in this particular case, I am going to reattach this same eye. I'm thinking about doing another float rod, and while I'm doing that, I will actually replace all of the eyes. But that's a bigger project, and that's not really something which is I'm going to talk about today, so I just want to really focus on the whole reel fitting project. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the tools and the things that we need to do this upgrade. I guess a starting point is definitely going to be the fact that we need to have the replacement reel fitting. So my preference is actually these Fuji style here, where the idea is you're actually adjusting, I guess from the top. I prefer cork. You can get this type in Duplon as well. So when it's on the rod, it actually looks like this. So obviously reel goes in here, I'm adjusting to lock it down, and yeah, that's the way it works. So just my preference, but it comes apart in 3 pieces. So this makes it a little bit easier, I think, but you know, this is what you're going to be putting and gluing onto the rod butt. and then obviously you need to put it all back together, get it all lined up and before you start doing all of the whipping. One of the challenges with this is actually the diameter of this piece of rubberized cork here is always a really small diameter for all of the rods that I've done so far and intend to do. I actually went and did a measuring exercise, so they need to be reamed out. The other kind of reel fitting which I've used, not really my preference, but I have used it and I'm going to use again, is this kind. So this is the kind where the reel fitting is actually going to sort of sit somewhere in the cork handle, right? So always going to still go from the top down, take it off down to here, but then have to think about rebuilding this part of the reel, the handle. You can buy pieces that are this kind of shape either in cork or in Duplon, so it's not too much of a drama, but just maybe a little bit of extra cost. I don't know, I've never really costed it, and it becomes a little bit of a preference. The idea is you sort of adjust from the bottom, lock it in place. I guess you could also put it on like this. I'm not really sure. I guess it just becomes a personal preference. So this is an example of where that's been used. This is just a little spinning rod that I've bought, which still haven't actually used. But you can see that here, got the adjustment, reel goes in, but we're adjusting from the bottom. Obviously this is a completely Duplon handle. Again, just a personal preference. So other piece which I've mentioned is I always prefer to put a hook keeper on now when I'm doing this. I just find them so much more convenient for my fishing. Might be partly to do with the fact that I predominantly fish rivers, and what that really means is I like to use old style Abu close face reels, and they've got the anti-reverse removed from them, and if I'm trying to kind of tighten them up, I usually hook them inside the cowling, but I just find the hook keepers are a lot easier to use. So I've been sort of looking at different types, tried a few, but these are the types that I actually like to use. I'll try and hold that up like that. So they actually fold down. Maybe it's better to show it on here. But you can see the piece which is whipped, and then they will fold down and they're out of the way. I don't quite know if there's a reason to ever fold it down. I tend to just have mine like that the whole time. Yeah. So that's kind of like the new bits, and then let's just talk through all of the other tools and so forth that I need. I guess for any kind of rod building or rebuilding exercise, probably the most commonly used thing is actually some masking tape, and you kind of need this to hold things in place, but also to put on the rod to act as markers and protection and all kinds of different things, along with a permanent marker, a Sharpie. Reason is to put markers where you want to line rings up and stuff like that. Little bit of a lesson learned for me was it's better to go overboard with like putting a straight line down the rod than trying to line it up when you're trying to go through all of the exercise with the whipping. Then a couple of sharp blades. So I've got a Stanley knife, which is an adjustable Stanley knife. I found that the idea of an adjustable Stanley knife is really, really useful when it comes to cutting the old cork off the rod butt, because I can just set it to be poking out a little bit, knowing that I can score through the cork and I'm not going to be cutting into the actual rod blank itself. So the idea of an adjustable is just really useful. I also use one of these little single-sided razor blades. I just find that they're really easy for nicking off loose threads when I'm whipping and that kind of thing. Source of heat, so cigarette lighter, or I've just started using a little heat gun, which is actually better, but you can get by with a cigarette lighter. You're going to need it anyway for the whipping to burn off any kind of fluffy bits from the thread, but yeah. A blunt knife, so I actually got a putty knife, which is obviously very, very blunt, but you could always use just like a regular table knife, right? Just needs to be blunt and use this for a bit of scraping and also for kind of levering the old cork off the handle. Something which I've just learned from some advice from somebody online, but is really, really good, is actually a bit of an old CD. And this actually took a bit of finding, because I'm still a bit of a music freak, and I've got a collection of CDs, and there was no way I was going to break one up, but I found an old software one at work, snapped it in half. And the reason what I use this for is for scraping the old epoxy and any old varnish off the rod blank. It's really good because it's not as hard as metal, and it means it's much less likely to do any damage during the scraping. Sounds a bit odd, but it really works. That's probably everything that come in regard to stripping the old handled rod blank down. Then when it comes to rebuilding, there's a few other things as well. So first of all, in my particular case, I've talked about I really like to use these, and one of the challenges I've got is that diameter is not going to match the diameter of a rod butt, which I'm using. Even this these tiny thin blanks for these Tricast wands that I'm rebuilding at the moment, the diameter is still going to be quite a delta there, quite a difference. And if I think about some of the other projects that I'm currently thinking about doing, so I'm going to read, my next project is going to be this. This is actually a pretty meaty swim feeder rod. It's actually an old Silstar rod, but again, if I look at that diameter to that, that's going to take a bit of work, yeah? So I found that actually the best way of approaching this was I actually bought a hand reamer from eBay. I think it cost like about a £5 or something. It wasn't a lot of money, and I found that that's pretty good for kind of patiently whittling down to get that hole to the right diameter. And then if I needed to go more, it's an old style, what do you call this, is this like a rat tail rasp or something? Certainly brings tears to my eyes every time I think about it, but this is also really good, not only to if I need to get a better diameter, but for some reason this seems to give a better finish to a rounded hole than just using the reamer alone. So yeah. Need to use some epoxy glue, so the kind of glue where you've got the two parts you mix together, and then you use that for gluing the new reel fitting onto the rod blank. To be quite honest, I've just been using the real cheap stuff from Poundland, so it costs £1. It's quick dry as well. It takes like 5 minutes, and I've just found it does exactly what I want it to do, which is basically just to glue that piece on back on, and I'll show you a little few tricks around that as I go through this video. Next things would then be all around the re-whipping. Now there are loads of YouTube videos all around whipping rings onto rods, and they are all going to be with people that are one hell of a lot much more better at doing it than I am. But just as a really, really quick summary about some of the things that I've learnt. So first of all, have a straight edge of some description. This is just a rule, but it could be anything, right? This is just the one I use, straight edge, dead useful. Other thing which is useful is again a tip, some aluminium foil, make a little tray and mix both the glue and also the epoxy which is used for the re-whipping the rings. In this, it helps with reducing bubbles, and it helps with kind of a bigger surface area. It just seems to really work well. It's a great tip from Kevin that shared that online. Something to mix it up with. Some pros would probably frown at the idea of using wood, the risk of, I don't know, bits of dust, splinters or whatever, but I found perfect. You can, you know, buy these from a craft shop or wherever they're cheap as, or, you know, you can actually pinch them from Costa or Starbucks or somewhere. And, you know, I tend to be a bit conscious about making sure that when I finished with it, it's not stuck to something, and then I just use it again and again and again. So there's actually quite a bit of a build-up of epoxy on them now, which I guess would help with the idea of dust and crap. This is the kit that I've been using for redoing the whipping. I bought this along with pretty much all of my stuff from the online place called Guides and Blanks, who are a UK-based company, but I've also seen these same kits available, I think, on Amazon and like other eBay and so forth. Is it the best? Probably not, but it's cheap for what is needed. So what we've got in here is it's a two-part epoxy, so you've got the hardener and the sealer, and I know they're not the right way around. Sorry, the hardener and the actual glue, and then there's also a sealer, which is, I think, just PVA white glue, which you're supposed to put on the threads to help them keep their colour over a long period of time. So I actually don't use this stuff. I found a tip online which was to use a different brand, which is supposed to be just a little bit better. I don't know, yeah, but this is what I use. And then whipping thread, and there's a whole thing about what's right and wrong in regards to thread, and to be quite honest, I've got a bucket full of different types of threads. Some of them are the proper whipping thread from Fuji and other brands, and yeah, they're great. But I've also just been using regular sewing thread. In the case of the Tricast rod that I'm going to be working on, I needed this kind of, what would you call this, maroony burgundy colour. I don't know, I'm not very good with colours. And it's actually a regular sewing thread, which is made by, you know, the quite a well-known company called Gutermann. And I transferred it off this bobbin. Is that what the right word is? I don't know. Off this bobbin onto this one. And the reason was so I could put it into what's like this fly tying thing. And I've just found for the way that I'm doing my whipping, this just seems to work a lot better for me than just having the bobbin of line just on the floor or somewhere. I know that the handmade fisherman, who's a real expert at this kind of stuff, he actually has the bobbin on the floor in a plastic bag, and that just seems to work really well for him. I just found I got loads and loads of twists, so I just found this is it. Right, this line I bought from a thread, sorry, this thread I bought from a sewing shop, and I bought 100% polyester thread, which is used for embroidery, yeah? Don't use, is it rayon thread? Because it's not anywhere near as strong as polyester. And if you use cotton, there's, I think there's more of a chance of the colour fading from it. And also it tends to be kind of a bit fluffy, right? And then you've got to kind of think about how to deal with that when you're putting the various coats on to actually finish the rod off, yeah? So for me, I just found this was the stuff to use, and it's just cheap as, yeah? Couple of sort of little things that I might use is, first of all, a little bit of emery cloth, just if I've got any high edges that I just can't get rid of underneath the blank where I'm going to be whipping. I found that the better the surface to whip on, it's just easier to get a clean finish. I learned a lesson with that. Originally I was just like, what the hell, it ain't going to matter. It's all going to get covered over and not going to see it. And that's true. But when it comes to trying to just get all of the threads to line up, minimal gaps, and then afterwards you go through a bit of an exercise of kind of what they call burnishing to flatten the threads, kind of just make sure you've got no gaps and everything, then I've just found it better. The smoother the finish to put that thread onto, the easier it is. The other thing which is also useful is to actually have a reel when you're close to hand. You know, just any old reel, it doesn't really matter. I've just got this one because I'm supposed to be servicing it. I haven't got round to it yet. But the whole thing is just to have something so that when you're trying to figure out, well, where's it going to go and what does that mean in regards to where do I need to cut the corks off, just having something that you can line things up with and just get it just in the right place rather than in the wrong place is just going to be really useful. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit next about how we're going to mark things up and start the whole process of breaking the rod down.